What's going on, guys? Nathan here, bringing you an educational commentary today, and truth be told, this video's topic will be for complete noobs to PC gaming, and if you already are pretty much even just an average player on PC and you understand frames per second and what resolutions do to your computer, feel free to click away right now. But this video will be explaining to people who might be new to PC gaming what frames per second means and why it is very important. So frames per second is a very important aspect to gaming in general. You know, PC gaming, console gaming, it affects everything. Frames per second is how smoothly you can run a game, hence the term frames per second, because it stands for how many pictures are literally displayed on your computer screen per second. So just as a benchmark, 60 frames per second is what you want to shoot for. Usually, well, actually almost always Call of Duty runs at 60 frames per second on like the Xbox and the PS3. That is why that game seems so much more smoother on console than a game like Battlefield 3, which runs at 30 frames per second. Now, supposedly, humans aren't able to see past, I believe, it's 25 frames per second, but playing a video game, you can definitely tell the difference between 30 frames per second and 60 frames per second. If you pitted two clones, for example, against each other playing Team Fortress 2 on the exact same computer, the exact same monitor, exact same internet, everything, you had them do the almost same maneuvers. Not the same maneuvers, but you kind of get the point I'm trying to make here, is that everything is constant about this scenario, except for one thing. If you put person A as playing Team Fortress 2 at 25 frames per second against person B who's playing Team Fortress 2 at 60 frames per second, there is a 90% chance that person B will outplay and beat person A just because they're running the game at a smoother rate. Just like if Battlefield 3 ran at 60 frames per second on the console, just like Call of Duty, versus 30 frames per second as it is now, it would definitely improve some players' abilities. And that's really the overall point of this commentary, is that frames per second does have a factor on skill. And I would know this personally because I used to play on a 2003 laptop with integrated graphics. I played Team Fortress 2 at, I believe, 800 by 600 resolution, all settings on low, and still only get 25-ish frames per second. So I know what it's like to play on a computer that just can't run a game, and I'm consistently playing on bad graphics with low FPS to boot. So anyway, back on the topic at hand, what I'm trying to say is that FPS is a major factor at how well you can play a game. I remember back when I got my computer with the Radeon 5670, I got the actual graphics card, I was able to play Team Fortress 2 at 60-ish, 80-ish FPS, and immediately I started getting better. And you could be the best Team Fortress 2 player in the world. You could be TLR, who's basically the best soldier at Team Fortress 2 in the world, and you could still lose to a person that isn't as good as you if you have lower FPS than them, just because, you know, your abilities can only go so far. Your machine has to make up for some of how good you are at a game. So speaking of your computer, the actual machine that you're playing on, I don't know if you guys have actually seen this, but this is why everyone just drools over graphics cards on like websites and forums and stuff, is because your graphics card in your computer is what actually allows your computer to function at such high frames per second. For example, I got my GTX 670 graphics card, which, long story short, is basically a $400 graphics card that I got, and because I spent that money on a good graphics card, I'm able to get around 100-ish, 120-ish frames per second on Battlefield 3 at 1080p, and I'll get into resolutions and everything after this, but I'm able to run that game at about 100-ish frames per second on Battlefield 3, which is a much more visually demanding game than my Radeon 5670, which I was only able to get around 25-ish, 30-ish frames per second, which if I run a game at 30 frames per second, I really just don't think it's even worth playing, just because the experience, that lack of smoothness is really just not worth playing it to me. And now that I got my graphics card, I'm just pretty much not going to play console anymore, other than like Call of Duty, just because Battlefield 3 runs better on PC because it is run at more than 30 frames per second. Skyrim is so smooth on computer, plus you can mod it out to make it even more just absolutely beautiful. But anyway, yeah, that's the point of graphics cards, is those are the actual devices that that make you achieve such high frames per second, and that is why they are very, very important. Now, obviously, people who know about computers will say, like, oh, your processor has part to do with it as well, but mainly it's your graphics card. So for those of you noobs at PC gaming or PCs in general, that's pretty much all you need to know as a beginner. So let's talk about resolutions a little bit here and how they actually affect your frames per second, as well, being that and your video settings are a major contributor to how smoothly your game can run. So for the sake of this commentary, we're going to say that 1080p is the max resolution you can run a game at, and let's just say 800 by 600 is the minimum, being that's pretty much what games go to nowadays. So what is the difference between 1080p resolution and 800 by 600? How does changing resolutions that drastically affect your frames per second? How it works is that at a 1080p resolution, you have more pixels that need to process colors and images. Your graphics card needs to process more pixels and calculate how they are going to change colors, versus at 800 by 600 resolution, your computer does not have to keep track of as many pixels, which means that it can give you more frames per second, simply because your graphics card will always be running at a certain level of performance, and if it doesn't have as many pixels to process, it will process the pixels it does have at a faster rate, and obviously vice versa for 1080p. If it has more pixels to process, then it won't process them as fast. So now that we know this, one way to simply increase your FPS on your computer game is to simply lower your resolution. And I know that this is very, very low-level basic stuff that most people listening to this already knows, but to someone completely new to PC gaming, this is definitely something that you need to know and is very, very basic. And if you didn't find this out, then that would just put you way behind everyone else, because this is just the basic stuff that you need to know. So speaking of that, yeah, so there are three factors really that contribute to your frames per second. It is your resolution, your graphics card, and then your video settings, which I'll get into right now. So your video settings include your regular default settings is what I would call it, your anti-aliasing, and then your FXAA. So these settings are known as eye candy settings, and they're pretty much just that. They're eye candy. They don't really like affect gameplay hugely, although it does make everything look really, really nice. For example, anti-aliasing smooths out jagged edges, and I actually did a comparison one time in Portal 2 with 8 times anti-aliasing versus none, and you can just definitely tell if you actually compare games side by side. But anyway, let's just start with the video effects themselves. So let's just take Team Fortress 2 for an example. There are, I think, 3 options in Team Fortress 2 that you can adjust. It is the texture detail, the model detail, and I think it's like water reflections or something like that. Basically, these settings are the type of graphics you're going to be looking at while playing the game. And what I would suggest to anyone that's new to PC gaming is to keep these settings on high, because that will make the actual video game look very, very good. And instead of having a high resolution but playing on low settings for these, play on high settings and then low resolution, simply because I personally think it's worth having better graphics as long as you play on like windowed mode. Your screen will basically become smaller. I personally like just having better graphics but less of a screen, versus I guess some people would like worse graphics but like 1080p resolution. However, keep in mind that resolution has a bigger impact on your computer's FPS versus the actual video settings themselves, because you could run, let's say, everything on high on Team Fortress 2 at 1600 by 900 resolution, which is a small decrease from 1080p. For the record, 1080p is actually 1920 by 1080, but I don't know, 1080p is what I always refer to it as. So you can actually run 1600 by 900 resolution on high graphics on Team Fortress 2, which is a small step down from 1080p, and still probably get the same amount of FPS if you went 1080p and then all low settings. So really, I think having high settings outbalances going down one resolution. So that's really what video effects are. They handle what you're actually looking at in-game. Now, anti-aliasing is what I will move on to next. Anti-aliasing, like I explained before, basically smooths out jagged edges in a video game, and you can notice it if you go from no anti-aliasing to like full anti-aliasing. However, anti-aliasing will take away a lot of your frames per second, going from, let's say, no anti-aliasing to like 4 times anti-aliasing, which most games go from 0 to 8 times anti-aliasing, just for the record, so people know. If you kind of shoot the gap there and go for the middle, that will pretty much take away 10 frames per second from your game, and if you go to 8 times anti-aliasing, I'd say that will take away maybe 20-ish, so be wary of that. However, if you can run a game and are willing to sacrifice 10-ish FPS, I would definitely put on some anti-aliasing, being it just makes the game look a lot better. However, it is not game-changing in itself. Lastly, we move on to FXAA, and I'm not entirely sure what this is, but I do know that it is a large component in your video settings. So if you have 10-ish, 20-ish frames per second to give up, probably more around the area of 10. So let's say you're running Team Fortress 2 at 70 FPS. Feel free to throw on FXAA. I'm not entirely sure what it does, but it can't hurt the graphics and would only make it better, I would assume. And you're only losing around 7-ish, 10-ish frames per second from what I've seen in my experience. So yeah, that's kind of what that is. I'm sorry I can't really give you guys more information, but I'll definitely probably Google that later and see what it actually is. But yeah. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is just about everything that I know on frames per second, you know, resolutions, your graphics card, and then your overall settings on a video game is really what make up how much FPS you're going to get. And yeah, you don't really need to like spend so much money on a graphics card. However, you know, that is definitely recommended if you really want to play those high performance games, such as like Crysis 2 is demanding as hell on your PC. So yeah, but that is pretty much general knowledge. That's what pretty much everyone who plays PC and knows about graphics cards knows. So if you are a complete noob to PC gaming, there you go. All you need to know about frames per second and gaming in roughly 12 minutes or so. And yeah, that's pretty much the video, guys. Thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. As always, please leave a rating on the video. If you could spare a second of your time, I'd really appreciate it. And feel free to subscribe to my channel for more Team Fortress 2 and or commentaries like this one, because I do those if you look at my past videos and stuff and junk, and yeah, things in grammar and words and stuff. And I'm gonna stop talking right now because I feel like I'm going off on a useless tangent and literally wasting your time. Like, see, just like right now I'm just wasting your time, but yet you still continue to listen to me. So that's pretty much the video, guys. Thank you all for watching once again, and I love you all. Bye bye.